Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we're looking at Minsc Timeless Heroes. So this is a Planeswalker commander, the 4 mana Gruul with 3 loyalty, and it says, when it enters and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may create Boo, a legendary 1/1 red hamster creature token with trample and haste. And then we have 2 abilities, +1, put 3/+1 counters on up to 1 target creature with trample or haste. And -2, sacrifice a creature. When you do, Minsc Timeless Heroes deals X damage to any target, where X is that creature's power. And if the sacrificed creature was a hamster, draw X cards. So this is the main loop that we're going to use for the advantage in this deck. It's play Minsc and generate a hamster. Then we immediately plus to put counters on the hamster. We hit somebody in the face probably. And then in the following turn, we want to absolutely maximize the power of the hamster as much as we can with various pump spells, and then activate the -2 to draw a ton of cards. And of course, it doesn't matter that we sack the hamster, because on upkeep, we're going to make another hamster, so we can keep repeating this loop. So to that end, let's start off with the pump spells. So we've got a lot of them, and these are going to be the spells that are going to pump our hamster, or hypothetically another creature, but mainly the hamster. We have cards like Berserk, which will double the power on our creature, and then the creature will die at end of combat, but it doesn't matter because we're going to get another hamster anyway, and we're sacking the hamster regardless. Then we've got some doubling of power, so Bulk Up to double a creature's power, Unleash Fury to double a creature's power, and Fangs of Colonia, which puts a +1 counter on a creature and then doubles the number of +1 counters on it. We also have just some straight up pump like Groundswell, Invigorate, Might of Old Krosa, and Phyto Burst. Hashep Oasis in the lands, although this is pretty inefficient. It doesn't really cost us anything to just have this be one of our lands. And then a card that I think a lot of people are not familiar with, but which is actually pretty good, Evolutionary Escalation, a 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 3 counters on target creature you control and 3 counters on target creature an opponent controls. And the benefit of this one is, although it is the least amount of power we can upgrade when you compare it to all of our other pump spells, and we do have to upgrade an opponent's creature, it's also a card that doesn't cost us anything, because we can have Evolutionary Escalation out ahead of time, and then on the turn where this triggers, we didn't have to pay for it. It also will keep pumping each additional hamster, whereas all of our other spells are just one-offs. To that end, we're also running Hero's Blade. This will automatically attach to any legend that enters the battlefield, including our legendary hamster token. So this is another way to just pump the hamster up without having to keep spending mana on it, since it will keep attaching to each new hamster. And then we've also got all of these cards that draw cards based on the power of a creature. So Disciple of Freyalise, Garruk, Greater Good, Lost March of the Ents, Life's Legacy, and Season of Gathering will all draw cards based on a creature's power. So this is for one of 2 reasons. Either we don't have Minsc and the hamster going on, and we just have some other big creature, or we just point our pump spells at some other big creature. We can still draw cards with these cards. Or if we have one of these, instead of using the Minsc negative ability, we can instead plus the hamster again, and then use one of these to draw even more cards. We also obviously have Skull Clamp, for which we can just clamp the hamster or any other creature in our deck, and then some other draw spells. We've got a number of pieces of fast mana, because the faster we can get Minsc down, the better. And it's especially the case because one of the problems we might run into is having a commander that's a planeswalker that can just get attacked by our opponents. So the faster we can get Minsc into play, the less likely our opponents will be to have any creatures that can actually attack and kill Minsc. A pretty straightforward mana base with obviously some notable cards like Disciple, Bridgeworks Battle, and Hashep Oasis, as previously mentioned. Obviously, we want to protect what we're doing, so we don't want our opponent to counter, remove, or otherwise interfere with anything that we're doing, so we've got cards like Defense Grid and City of Solitude so that our opponents can't mess with us. Although it should be noted that for cards like these 2, it also messes with opponents on each other's turns, so it can be potentially risky to play these cards. So let's say one of your opponents has a combo, and then another one of your opponents maybe has like a counter spell for that. Well, if you've got one of these cards in play, it can be harder or impossible for your opponents to interact with each other. So do note the downsides of these types of cards and replace them with something else if you think that it's going to be too much of an issue. Then we've got a ton of ramp. So one of the things that we're going to do is we want to be able to sweep the board so that Minsc stays alive. So we're in red and green, so we don't have access to cards like Ghostly Prison and whatnot. So the only other method that we have of keeping the board clear is just sweepers. But if we're playing sweepers, we don't really want a bunch of our ramp spells to be mana dorks that are going to die as well from those sweepers. So we mainly have either spells like, Into the North and Rampant Growth and whatnot that are just going to tutor up lands, or we have things like Fanatic of Ronus, which has 4 toughness that might survive some of those sweepers. The Crow Tribe Elder, which just sacrifices itself anyway, so it doesn't matter. And then the one exception is Delighted Halfling, because the uncounterability clause on it is too important. So speaking of those sweepers, we do have cards like Blasphemous Act, like Brotherhood's End, like Chain Reaction, Another thing is that we don't actually have to play mono rocks because we have all of those other ramp spells. So we can play cards like Meltdown, Seeds of Innocence, Structural Assault, Ansrog's Rampage, Fade from History, and Bane of Progress to blow up all the artifacts and enchantments on the board. So this is a way that we can severely curb what our opponents are doing without really affecting much of what we're doing. And then we have Natural Order to go fetch some big green creatures. So getting to that, there is no combo in which the hamster just becomes enormous and kills our opponents. Like, obviously, over enough time, we could keep making hamsters and keep flinging them at people, but that alone is probably not good enough to actually win the game. So to that end, we're going to ramp into some really big threats and use those to win the game. So we have our giant Eldrazi Titans and cards like Void Winnower. Xenagos is a good way to pair with the hamster because it's a way that we can just keep pumping the hamster as well every single turn without having to invest the +1 on it. We also have Atali Primal Conqueror, and Last March of the Ents is also going to be a way for us to cheat in a bunch of these big creatures. Also, since all of these are really big creatures, we can use them in combination with the power-based draw spells, or in the case of Last March, the toughness-based draw spell. We also have Galta Stampede Tyrant as another way of cheating in all of our other big stuff. We have Doubling Season, which, although doubling our hamster doesn't really matter because it's obviously legendary, it does double the number of +1 counters that go on it. And we have the Ozolith. So every time that we sack one of our hamsters, all of the +1 counters on it will get saved under the Ozolith. And then the new hamster that comes out will get all the counters. Then all the counters will get going onto the Ozolith again. And we can keep repeating to make, again, our hamster really, really big over time. And then we have a few other big things like Apex, Altasaur, and Terastodon. And then Renin 6 in here as another Planeswalker that can just help us get more, fetch lands back from the graveyard. Since we're sweeping the board anyway, this can just be another fine thing. Normally, we wouldn't really want Planeswalkers in our deck because they're too vulnerable, but hey, we're sweeping the boards anyway, so this is fine. We also have Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, another big creature spell to play. And then I thought about playing any number of other different cards in this deck, so some other big threats like Blightsteel or Balefire Dragon, or maybe some other sweepers like Anger, Chandra's Ignition, Waltz of Rage, any of those cards. Another potential option to go with was, since we have a Planeswalker that makes a creature token, we hypothetically could have run cards like Transmogrify, Divergent Transformations, and Luca Coppercoat Outcast as ways of, polymorphing the hamster token into a big threat. Now, the problem I had with that is that there's a number of creatures in our deck that are like small, dinky creatures that I didn't really want to give up. So creatures like Delighted Halfling and whatnot. We could have switched them around and just played all the big creatures and just the polymorph effects, but I ultimately decided not to do that, but this is definitely a route that you could explore. But with all that said, that's going to do it for Minsc and Boo Timeless Heroes in EDH.